The clicking doesn't sound like a weapon. It sounds like a heartbeat slowing to zero. In the humid dark of a Washington basement, the most expensive minds in the military are staring at a billion-dollar blackout. It wasn't just a scrambled message. It was a mechanical eclipse. How did the world's mathematically perfect fortress of code, a masterpiece of steel and electricity, surrender its soul to a woman with a dull pencil? Why did the generals tasked with the nation's survival become the first victims of their own degrees? But that was only the surface. The official maps were blank. The only warning came from a woman the colonels didn't even see. A school teacher's quiet patience versus a global empire's roar. Why did the powerful system ignore the only tactic that could save them? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of the underdog, in the dust of time. September 1939. Washington, D.C. The air in the basement of the Signal Intelligence Service is thick. A heavy, humid soup of stale coffee and the metallic tang of drying ink. Outside, the world is beginning to burn as the shadows of war lengthen across the Pacific. But here, in the silence of the archives, there is only the rhythmic, mocking clicking of typewriter keys. The United States is deaf. Across the ocean, the Japanese Empire has deployed a mechanical monster, the Type B Cipher. We call it purple. It is a masterpiece of complexity, a wooden box housing a labyrinth of telephone stepping switches. The process is a mechanical death sentence for anyone trying to listen in. The operator taps a key. Inside the machine, the fatal flaw is not a mistake, but a design of impossible geometry. These switches spin like a combination lock that resets itself with every breath, rerouting electricity through trillions of randomized paths. The output is a garbled ghost. To the experts, it functions like a toilet tank that never overflows. Perfectly sealed. Perfectly silent. The masters of logic. The nation's elite cryptanalysts stare at the intercepted pages until their eyes bleed. They see only a void. They look for traditional flaws, a slip of the finger, a repeating letter. But there are none. They are drowning in a sea of randomized data, searching for a crack in the armor when the armor itself is made of shifting smoke. It is mathematically perfect, the lead analysts whisper in the hallways. They speak with a reverence that borders on surrender. A machine of this caliber can only be defeated by a bigger machine. They believe that the Japanese code is unbreakable because the manual of mathematics says so. They prioritize the procedure of the search over the truth of the signal. They treat the silence of the purple code as a physical wall, one that no human mind, especially not a clerical one, could ever hope to climb. And then there is Genevieve. She sits in a cramped, paper-cluttered corner, her desk buried under stacks of raw intercepts that the men have already deemed noise. A former school teacher from Buffalo, Genevieve Grotjan, is a quiet presence in a room full of loud frustrations. To the colonels and the Ivy League mathematicians, she is an administrative necessity, a pair of hands to sort the wreckage of the day's failures. They do not see the mind that spent years identifying the hidden rhythms of algebra. They do not see the woman who understands that even the most complex machine is built by human hands, and human hands always leave a fingerprint. While the system screams in panic, Genevieve is already in the dark, holding the silence that will eventually save them. She watches the way the men work. They are aggressive. They try to break the code like they would break a horse, with brute force and intellectual shouting. They build massive charts and argue over statistical probabilities. They are looking for a door that is locked, unaware that the house they are trying to enter has no doors at all. Genevieve doesn't shout. She listens. She treats the scrambled letters like a classroom of rowdy children. She knows that eventually, even the most chaotic group will fall into a pattern if you watch them long enough. The humid basement becomes her world. She ignores the ticking clocks and the rising tension of the headlines. She ignores the way the men walk past her desk without a glance, treating her like a piece of the office furniture. She is looking for the resonance beneath the surface of the static. A lead analyst pauses by her desk, his shadow falling over her meticulous charts. He sees her circling clusters of letters with a dull pencil. "We need a breakthrough, Miss Grotjan," he says, his voice dripping with a patronizing weight. "Not a grammar lesson. Leave the heavy lifting to the engineers. This isn't a classroom." He walks away, returning to his team of experts who continue to throw themselves against the wall of logic. He treats the quiet teacher as a bystander in her own office. He believes his rank and his degrees protect him from the reality of his own failure. But he has fatally underestimated the silence. He treats the lack of progress as a lack of hope, unaware that Genevieve isn't looking for a secret. She is looking for a pulse. The experts believe the enemy is a genius. They believe the purple machine is a god. They have convinced themselves that the Japanese have achieved a level of perfection that defies human error. This is the crystallized arrogance of the SIS. They claim that a total intelligence failure is impossible because the manual said their methods were foolproof. But the machine is not a god. It is a clock, and every clock, no matter how finely tuned, has a tick. Genevieve finds the first tick on a Tuesday afternoon. It is subtle, a tiny repetition in a sea of millions of characters. To anyone else, it's a coincidence. To the men in charge, it's a statistical anomaly to be ignored. But to the school teacher, it is the sound of a footstep in a supposedly empty house. She shouldn't even have the intercepts. In the rigid caste system of the Signal Intelligence Service, Genevieve is a living filing cabinet. To look at the raw, purple data is more than a breach of protocol. It is a violation of the Espionage Act. She works in the dead of night, her desk illuminated by a smuggled flashlight, knowing that if the duty officer opens the door, her career ends in a federal cell. She is committing a quiet act of treason against a bureaucracy that would rather be blind than be saved by a subordinate. While the experts sleep in the comfort of their rank, Genevieve is a fugitive in her own office, stealing the secrets she needs to save a country that treats her as a ghost. The pressure is mounting. The Pacific is a powder keg, and the United States is blindfolded, reaching into the dark. The Type B machine continues to churn out its impossible riddles, and the masters of logic are beginning to crack. They don't realize that the hammer is already falling. They believe the enemy is miles away, hidden behind a mechanical curtain. They don't see that the curtain has already been singed. Not by a bomb, but by a pencil. 18 months. It is a span of time that can break a person's spirit. For 547 days, The basement of the Signal Intelligence Service has been a tomb for American intuition. The year is now 1940. The humidity of a DC summer has turned the archives into a furnace of rotting paper and frustration. While the elite cryptanalysts, men with degrees from Harvard and MIT, exhaust themselves with brute force logic, Genevieve Grotjan sits in a pool of low light. She is a shadow among giants. The men are operating on a scale of war, thinking in terms of battalions and grand strategies. Genevieve is operating on the scale of a syllable. The technical reality of the purple machine is a nightmare of mechanical engineering. It uses 4 groups of 25 telephone stepping switches. Every time an operator strikes a key, an electrical pulse surges through a labyrinth of wires, swapping a simple vowel for a randomized consonant. The sequence is a mechanical kaleidoscope, turning the logic of language into a shifting, unrecognizable static. It is a machine that resets its own brain with every heartbeat. The experts are looking for a break in the machine's armor. They want to find a mechanical failure, a spark that shouldn't be there. They treat the problem like a safe to be cracked. But Genevieve treats it like a song. While the system screams in panic, she is already in the dark, holding the silence that will save them. She begins to look for the resonance beneath the surface of the impossible noise. She isn't looking for words yet. She is looking for the heartbeat of the person who built the machine. She knows that even the most perfect logic has a rhythm. She stares at the pages of randomized letters until her vision blurs. The yes but of the basement is relentless. The experts find a repeating letter, yes, but it turns out to be a statistical ghost, but. They think they've found a flaw in the wiring, yes, but the next intercept proves them wrong, but. Every lead is a dead end. Every hope is a hollow echo. The directors of the SIS dismiss the tension as a lack of manpower. They believe that if they just add more desks, more paper, and more qualified men, the wall will crumble. They treat the mystery as a budget issue. But the ocean respects no budget. While they argue over funding in the upstairs offices, the hidden truth of the Pacific, the true master of the storm, is preparing to remind them who is really in charge. Genevieve ignores the politics. She is deep in the black box. She notices something the others have discarded. It is a subtle correlation, a tiny whisper of sixes. In the chaos of the purple machine's output, there is a specific group of 6 letters that seem to behave differently than the rest. To the mathematicians, it is a rounding error. To the school teacher, it is a footprint. She begins to map these 6s. For hours that bleed into days, she doesn't move. She doesn't speak. She becomes a ghost in her own office, her pencil moving across the paper with the precision of a surgeon. Suddenly, a shadow falls over her desk again. It is one of the lead cryptographers, his face a mask of exhaustion and irritation. He looks at her charts, rows upon rows of handwritten correlations that look like a child's homework. "Miss Grotjan," he sighs, the sound thick with the hubris of a man who believes he has already seen everything. "The machine is randomized. There are no patterns. You are chasing phantoms in the static. We need you to finish the filing for the morning brief. The war won't wait for your hobbies." He treats her discovery as a distraction. He believes that because he cannot see the pattern, it does not exist. It is the arrogance of the expert who has forgotten how to learn. but the hammer is already in mid-swing. Genevieve doesn't argue. She doesn't defend her work. She simply looks back down at the paper. She knows that the logic of the machine is not found in the loud declarations of generals, but in the quiet insistence of a repeating digit. It is September 20th, 1940. The basement is unusually quiet. The men are at their breaking point. The Type B intercepts are piling up like cordwood, useless and terrifying. The SIS is staring into a black hole. Genevieve is looking at a sheet of paper. She sees a specific correlation, a sequence of letters that aligns perfectly with a previous intercept from 3 weeks prior. It shouldn't happen. In a machine that is mathematically perfect, this repetition is a physical impossibility. She circles it. Then she finds another, and another. The letters begin to hum. The noise stops. For 18 months, she's been staring at a wall of static. And suddenly, the wall becomes a window. She sees the mechanical heart of the Japanese machine. She sees the way the switches are wired. She sees the flaw. The machine wasn't random. It was just incredibly disciplined. And like any discipline, it had a habit. In a singular, cinematic moment of clarity that shocks the air in the room, Genevieve stands up. Her chair scrapes against the concrete floor. A sharp, sudden sound that cuts through the low murmur of the office. The analysts look up, annoyed by the interruption. They see the quiet schoolteacher holding a pad of paper. Her hands are steady. Her eyes are clear. "I've found it," she says. The phrase is simple. It is not a shout. It is a statement of fact. The room remains silent for a beat too long. The experts look at each other, some with amusement, others with pity. They expect a minor observation, a small correction to a footnote. They do not expect the keys to the empire. She walks to the center of the room, to the giant blackboard where the unsolvable equations are scrawled. She picks up a piece of chalk. With a few swift, certain strokes, she dismantles the greatest secret in Tokyo. She maps the sixes. She shows them how the stepping switches are actually moving, not in a random dance, but in a predictable, elegant cycle. The laughter stops. The lead analyst, the man who had mocked her hobby only hours before, moves closer to the board. He stares at the chalk marks. He looks at the raw intercepts. He looks back at the board. The lead analyst does not speak. He doesn't offer a hand or a word of praise. He stands before the blackboard, his face drained of color, looking at the simple chalk marks that have made his entire career look like a performance. The room isn't filled with cheers. It is filled with the suffocating weight of masculine shame. They stare at the chalk, then at the floor, unable to meet the eyes of the woman who just rendered their million-dollar theories obsolete. Genevieve stands there, her pencil still in hand. But the masters of logic have already turned away. They aren't looking at the solution. They are looking for a way to explain how they missed what a schoolteacher found. A woman dismissed by the era's academic hierarchies had just handed the United States the most private thoughts of the Japanese Empire. The experts had been looking for a monster. Genevieve had found the man behind the curtain. While the establishment had spent millions on logic, they had been defeated by a lack of imagination. They believed the disaster of being deaf was a technical failure. They didn't realize it was a failure of the spirit. They look at Genevieve Grotjan, the school teacher from Buffalo, and for the first time, they truly see her. but the satisfaction of the moment is already beginning to sour. The machine is broken, but the massive system that ignored her is already preparing to reclaim the victory as its own. The breakthrough is complete. The United States can now read the magic intercepts. They can hear the whispers of the Japanese ambassadors. They can see the movements of the fleet. But history is a cruel editor. As the men in the room begin to celebrate, shouting for the directors and calling for the press, Genevieve quietly steps back into the shadows of her corner. She has done the impossible. She has changed the course of the war, but as the light of victory begins to shine, the architect of that victory is already being pushed back into the dark. December 7th, 1941. The tropical sun rises over Pearl Harbor, glinting off the steel of a Pacific fleet that believes it is resting in a sanctuary. But the sanctuary is a mirage. In Washington, the magic intercepts are already screaming. Thanks to Genevieve's breakthrough, the United States is reading the final Japanese diplomatic ultimatum in real time. The words are there. The intent is clear. The Type B machine has surrendered its secrets. But here's the cruelest irony of the human paradox. A system can have the truth in its hands and still choose to be blind. The bureaucratic machine, bloated by its own hierarchy, fails to move the information fast enough. The warnings are buried under protocols, delayed by mid-level indecision, and sent through channels that are too slow for the speed of modern war. While the message that could have saved thousands sits on a desk, the first torpedo strikes, and for a moment there is only silence. Then, the steel screams. The tragedy was not a failure of intelligence. It was a failure of the system to trust the intelligence it had fought so hard to obtain. As the war ends and the smoke clears, the light of history begins to find its favorites. The directors of the agencies, the generals in the war rooms, and the male mathematicians who built the bombs receive the Distinguished Service Medals. Their names are etched into the foundations of the emerging Cold War intelligence community. But Genevieve, the schoolteacher who cracked the unbreakable code with a pencil, is left in the shadows. She does not stand on the podium. She does not receive the parades. The system, having used her brilliance to survive, now finds her presence inconvenient to its narrative of masculine military genius. She is transitioned back into the quiet anonymity of the archives, her name slowly fading from the memos and the classified reports. She becomes a footnote in a story she actually wrote. Genevieve didn't stay to watch them take the credit. She didn't have to. The system did exactly what it was designed to do. It consumed her brilliance and discarded the container. Today, we don't call it a failure of war. We call it operational efficiency. We still build massive billion-dollar algorithms to solve problems that a single, ignored person in the basement has already fixed. Genevieve Grotjan is dead, and the archives that once hid her work are now her only monument. We haven't learned. We've just gotten better at building the walls that keep the geniuses in the dark. It's that we forget to listen to the people who are currently trying to save us. If you believe that stories like Genevieve Grotjan's deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing, We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.